Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. I'm excited to show you how calculations work in Displayr. You can truly calculate anything in Displayr, so you can stop using Excel and do all of your data analysis in one tool. If you have any questions, please type them into the questions field in GoToWebinar, and I'll go through as many questions at the end as possible. If you don't have Displayr and want to learn more about it, you can book a demo using the web address shown here. Now, let's start by discussing a simple framework that describes how calculations fit into data analysis workflows. Simply put, we collect data to inform and make better decisions that produce value. And we go through several stages to turn data into value. In market research, we start by capturing data via surveys, but you can see other collection methods for other data types here as well. We store collected data and then clean, tidy, and restructure it. Then we move on to tabulation. This is a broad term for a variety of analysis methods. In Displayr, tabulation is very straightforward. While it's not our focus today, this is how you tabulate in Displayr for those of you who are new to Displayr. This cross tab here would be much more difficult and time-consuming to create in Excel. You'd have to select the data, create or insert a pivot table, select what to include in the pivot table, select what values to count, etc. It's a pain, and even after all that work, you wouldn't have the stat testing that you see here that Displayr does automatically. Another broad group of analyses are advanced analyses, like regression. I'm going to perform a simple linear regression that predicts Net Promoter Score using customer effort ratings. As you can see, advanced analyses like regression are easy to perform with simple drag and drop into Displayr. But like tabulation, they're not our focus today. Moving along the data value chain, we then work out which analyses are interesting. This is the discovery stage. Then we often do simple calculations, usually in Excel or Google Sheets, and then we visualize them, craft a story, and share it with stakeholders. The simple calculations we do here are what we at Displayr like to call bespoke analyses, for lack of a better term. These bespoke analyses are our focus today. How do we use Displayr to perform all the simple calculations that we normally do in Excel or Google Sheets? We'll answer that question during this webinar. We should want to do bespoke analyses in Displayr, since that means they'll always be hooked up to our visualizations and everything will update automatically when we update our data, like when we filter to focus on a specific segment, or we get a new wave of data for a tracker. If instead we're always exporting to Excel or Google Sheets and then doing calculations there, everything's disconnected and we end up doing calculations by hand, which is slow and error prone. There's a better way, and it's doing calculations in Displayr. Let's start with a very simple calculation, something as simple as adding 1 plus 1. Simple math works the same way in Displayr as in Excel. I just create a calculation, And in the code editor above the page, I can type in the formula or calculation, 1 plus 1. And once I hit calculate, you can see the output on the page returns the result of the calculation, which is 2. We can do a lot more in Displayr than in Excel, however. For example, if we wanted to create a table that summarizes respondents' ages, I can write code using the R programming language, and I could even use ChatGPT to generate the R code for me if I don't know it off the top of my head. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll ask ChatGPT. And I can stop it right here. And it's telling us that we want to use the summary function. And I can even go ahead and copy the code example and go back to Displayr and paste it in to the calculation, the code for our calculation. And all I need to do is tell it what to include or use in the summary function. You can see, just like in Excel and Google Sheets, you can select things by simply clicking on them in Displayr. I just start typing the code in and then click on what the code should reference or use. There's no need to type in the variable name. Now, what about a crosstab? Let's ask ChatGPT about that. Okay, it's telling us to use the table function. I'll paste in the code, and then I just need to tell it what to include. And we'll create a crosstab with the main phone company in the rows and age in the columns. There we go. Now, this crosstab here is not as nice as Displayr's native crosstabs. It doesn't have stat testing or percentages, but we could get there with some more work. And of course, there's no point in writing code to do things that we can do with simple drag and drop. I'm just starting off by showing you the mechanics of calculating anything in Displayr. Here's a summary table showing respondents' main phone companies. And I have some data in Excel. Let me show you that. Okay, we have market size and average revenue per user. I can go ahead and copy that data and paste it into Displayr. Now, let's calculate total annual revenue for each phone company in our summary table. I'll insert another calculation. And this time, I'll use the whole table as an input for the calculation. And I can select the whole table by simply clicking this tab above the top left corner of the table. That inserts it, again, into the code, and then we can multiply it by market size and average revenue per user. And I'll quickly remove the percent sign and add a dollar sign. There we go. Now, we could have done this in Excel, but Displayr is much smarter. For example, if I sort the summary table in descending order, like this, you'll see the calculation automatically updates and sorts as well. Same thing if I combine categories in the summary table. Let's say I want to visualize just the female column of this crosstab here. I can just select the percentages in the female column and then create a visualization like I normally would. And the visualization is going to reference those cells in the female column and use them in the visualization. And looking at the data source, we see that it's actually a calculation. And that calculation is selecting rows 1 through 9 in our crosstab and column 2, which is the female column. Now, the calculation will currently always select the second column, even if it changes. But like in Excel, we can create a fixed reference by pressing the F4 key. So I can click in the calculation, and instead of referencing the second column, I can fix it to the female column, regardless of its position. So now, if I go ahead and I move the female column to the left, so it's the first column, you'll see that the visualization stays up to date and sticks with the female column. We can also create more customized calculations when creating visualizations. I'm going to insert a gauge visualization. And right now, it doesn't have any data connected to it. I want to connect it to the Net Promoter Score variable, but first I need to calculate the average Net Promoter Score. I can actually connect the gauge to the Net Promoter Score variable and calculate its average in one step. To do so, I just need to tell the visualization that it's going to use a calculation as its data source. And then I type in the calculation. So I'll type in average. And then I just need to tell it what to include in the average. Let me click in there again, and we'll click on NPS. There we go. And now the gauge shows the average Net Promoter Score. What if I want to calculate the average of multiple columns in a table like this table here? I'll go ahead and insert another calculation. And knowing that I want an average of each column, I can go ahead and start typing in average. And you can see that it gives me a few options. And sure enough, we want that third option, average each column. So I can just click on it. It'll complete the code for me. And then I just need to select what columns we want averages for. So I go ahead and just select those in the table. Now the calculation has given us averages of each column, but you can see here all those averages are actually in one column. And ideally what we want is we want those averages in one row that lines up nicely with the table above it. So we need to transpose the results of the calculation. So let's go ahead and ask ChatGPT one last question. How do we transpose using R? Okay, and you can see we're going to use this T function, which is short and sweet, so no need to copy it. I can just go back to Displayr and edit the code. And specifically, I just put that T function around the existing code that averages each column. Now we have averages in one row, and I can just resize and reposition the table so it lines up nicely with the table above it. Often in research, we want to create a bespoke table. For example, we may want to create a table of words or show some simple math. We can do things like these in Displayr using a calculation grid. So I just created a calculation grid, and you can see it starts off with one row and one column. I'm going to add a couple more rows. Now in Excel, you just type straight into the cells whatever you want, whether it's text or numbers. Calculation grids are a bit different in Displayr. If we want text, we need to surround it in quotation marks. So I can double click this first row label, and you can see it already has the quotation marks. So I'll just update the label to revenue. The second row is for cost. And the third row is profit. And you could probably take a guess where I'm going with this. Okay. Like in Excel, you can hit the enter key to just quickly enter data in a calculation grid and move to the next cell. I'm going to quickly update the column label, and this is going to be just a $sign. And our revenue is 30. Our costs are 20. Okay. So now we see a table like those you can create in PowerPoint with both text and numbers. But you can't do the following in PowerPoint. We're going to subtract costs from revenue in the calculation grid to calculate profit. Just select revenue and subtract from that cost. And there is profit. There are a lot of different ways to glue together data from multiple tables. Now with a calculation grid, we can do it in Displayr just like how it's done in Excel. So I just create another calculation grid, and I'm going to add a few more rows and one more column. I can just select the row labels and the percentages from the first table, the consider table, copy those, and then paste them into our calculation grid. And you can see when I go to paste them in, I have a few options. I could paste them in as static values, or I could paste them in as links so they stay connected to the summary table. So if the summary table changes or updates, those changes or those updates will be reflected in our calculation grid as well because it's connected. There we go. All right, I'll quickly update the column label, and we know this is the consider column. And our second column is going to be the share column. And I'll go ahead and copy and paste those percentages as links as well. Okay. Now you can see we don't have share percentages for the last two rows, so we can tidy up the calculation grid and get rid of those last two rows by deleting them. Okay. Now I'm going to insert a third column into our calculation grid. And this third column is going to be the conversion column. And I can actually add in a conversion formula to calculate the conversion rate for each brand, starting with Burger Shack in the first row. And the conversion formula is simply the share percentage divided by the consider percentage multiplied by 100. There we go. Oh. Let's try it one more time, see if it gets. Oh, you know what I did? I entered an equal sign and I didn't even need it. Let me just delete it. And like I said, share percentage divided by consider percentage multiplied by 100. There we go. And just like in Excel, I can drag down to apply the conversion formula to subsequent cells in the conversion column. And then I can go ahead and format specific cells however I want. For example, let's say I want to call out the highest conversion rate for Arnold's. I select the Arnold's conversion rate, and then I can go ahead and let's go ahead and add a thick red border to that cell. And we can also make the font bold, and we'll make the font red as well to really call out that high conversion rate. All right. Friendly reminder that if you don't have Displayr and want to learn more about it, you can book a demo using the web address shown here. Now, let's move on to your questions and answer as many of them as possible in the remaining time. Just give me a few seconds to switch gears and review the questions. And a friendly reminder that you can type in any questions you have in the questions field in GoToWebinar. I'm not seeing any questions so far, so last call for any questions. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time, and have a great rest of your day.